The 17 ships came out of nowhere, appearing near Jupiter like ghosts. They were huge, but they looked broken. Smoke poured from engines. Hull plates were missing. Some ships had holes so big you could see right through them. Inside those vessels were 2 million aliens who had nowhere else to go. Ambassador Kelris stood on the bridge of the lead ship and stared at the blue planet in the distance. Earth. He had heard stories about humans. They were new to space travel, barely 30 years since their first faster-than-light flight. His own people, the Velnar, had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. But now the Velnar were running for their lives and the humans were their last hope. The Velnar homeworld was gone. The Krath Dominion had come with their warships and their hunger for conquest. The Krath did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. They took what they wanted and destroyed everything else. Kelris had watched his beautiful planet burn from orbit as the refugee fleet escaped. He still saw it in his dreams. Captain Jake Morrison was having a normal day until the sensors started screaming. His ship, the Defender, was on routine patrol near Jupiter. Nothing ever happened out here. Mining ships passed by sometimes. Maybe a lost tourist vessel. But today, 17 massive alien ships appeared and every single one was sending distress signals. Morrison ran to the communications station. The translator was having trouble with the alien language, but slowly the words became clear. They were refugees. They were dying. They needed help. Behind them, somewhere in the dark of space, hunters were coming. Morrison did not hesitate. He sent an emergency signal back to Earth. This was bigger than one patrol ship could handle. This needed admirals and presidents and people who made the big decisions. But while he waited for orders, Morrison moved his ship closer to the refugee fleet. If something was hunting them, it would have to go through him first. On Earth, in the command center, Admiral Lisa Hayes received the message. She was a tough woman who had spent 30 years in the military. She had seen combat during the Mars Rebellion. She had commanded ships in deep space, but she had never seen anything like this. 2 million refugees fleeing genocide, and they wanted Earth to save them. Hayes called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Council. Within 2 hours, every representative from every nation was connected. President Daniel Cross sat at the head of the table looking tired. This was not a decision any leader wanted to make. The debate started immediately. Some representatives said Earth could not help. Humanity had 12 billion people to feed. Resources were tight. Mars was still being colonized. The moon bases needed supplies. How could they take in 2 million aliens? Others argued differently. Representative Carlos Rivera stood up and spoke with passion in his voice. He talked about human history, about refugees turned away from safe harbors, about people fleeing persecution with nowhere to go. He asked a simple question. What kind of species would humanity be if they closed the door on people running from extermination? Dr. Helen Grant was the chief xenobiologist for Earth. She examined the medical data the Velnar had sent. The aliens were dying. Radiation from their damaged ships was killing them slowly. They had not eaten proper meals in weeks. Children were sick. Old ones were giving up hope. But the data also showed something important. The Velnar could breathe Earth's air. They could eat Earth's food. They were compatible with human space. The voting took hours. Arguments went back and forth. Some said helping the Velnar would make Earth a target. If the Krath were hunting them, the Krath might come here. Others said that was exactly why Earth had to help. Because running from bullies never worked. Someone had to stand up. President Cross listened to every voice. He read every report. He looked at pictures of Velnar children huddled in broken ships. Finally, he made his decision. Earth would help. The Velnar would be given sanctuary. Humanity would find them a home. When Ambassador Kelris heard the news, he wept. His people gathered around view screens throughout the fleet, watching the transmission from Earth. President Cross spoke directly to them. He said Earth had room for people who needed safety. He said no one should die alone in the dark of space. He said humanity would stand with them, but there was a problem. Earth was crowded. Mars was not ready for 2 million new people. The moon bases were too small. Where could the Velnar go? Commander Paul Dixon ran the Terraform Corps. His job was making planets livable for humans. He had been working on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, for 15 years. The project was going well. The atmosphere was being converted. In another 30 years, people could walk on Titan without suits. But Dixon had an idea. What if they did not have 30 years? What if they had to do it faster? Dixon looked at the Velnar data. They had technology Earth did not have. Atmospheric processors that were 300 years more advanced than human ones. If the Velnar shared that technology, if humans and Velnar worked together, they could make Titan livable in months instead of decades. The plan was presented to both councils, human and Velnar. It was ambitious. It was risky. It would take everyone working together, but it would give the Velnar what they needed most, a home. Captain Morrison escorted the Velnar fleet to Saturn. His ship flew alongside the massive refugee vessels, guiding them through the outer solar system. He watched Titan grow larger in the viewport, its orange atmosphere swirling with storms. Soon that moon would be home to 2 million aliens. Soon humans and Velnar would be neighbors. Admiral Hayes stood in her office looking at star charts. She was happy Earth had made the right choice. But she was also worried. The Krath Dominion had hunted the Velnar across light years. Would they stop just because the Velnar had found protection? Hayes did not think so. She began writing orders for new ship construction. If the Krath came looking for the refugees, Earth needed to be ready. On Titan's surface, the first construction crews were landing. Humans in environment suits stepped out onto the icy ground. Behind them, Velnar engineers emerged from their ships, their tall forms moving carefully in the lower gravity. They looked at each other, these two species who had just met. Then a human extended a hand. A Velnar took it. Together they began building a new home. Ambassador Kelris stood on a ridge overlooking the construction site. His people were alive. They had been given a chance to rebuild. But he knew the cost. Humanity had just painted a target on itself. The Krath would come. They always came. And when they did, Earth would be standing between them and the Velnar. Kelris whispered a prayer in his ancient language. He prayed that humanity knew what it had just agreed to. He prayed that their courage would be enough. Most of all, he prayed that his people would be worthy of the sacrifice these humans might have to make. 3 months passed and Titan was changing faster than anyone had predicted. The orange sky was clearing. The temperature was rising. The ice was melting into lakes and rivers. What should have taken 30 years was happening in less than 1. The secret was cooperation. Engineer Kyle Roberts could not believe what he was seeing. He stood inside the massive atmospheric processor, watching Velnar technician Thessier work. The alien's 4-fingered hands moved across controls that Kyle had spent years learning. But Thessier was doing things Kyle never knew were possible. The processors were running at 300% efficiency. Kyle asked how it worked. Thessier tried to explain, using words the translator struggled with. Something about harmonic resonance and molecular excitement. Kyle did not understand all of it, but he understood enough. The Velnar had been doing this for centuries. They knew tricks humanity had not discovered yet, but it went both ways. Thessier was amazed by human fusion reactors. The Velnar used different power systems, cleaner but less powerful. Human reactors were brute force, pushing energy output to maximum. When they connected human power to Velnar processors, the results exceeded both species' predictions. On the surface, the first Velnar city was rising. It did not look like any human city. The buildings curved and flowed like they were growing from the ground. Velnar architecture was organic, based on patterns from nature. Human construction teams, led by foreman Linda Hayes, worked alongside Velnar builders. Linda had been a construction boss for 20 years. She thought she knew everything about building. But the Velnar taught her new methods. They sang while they worked, their voices creating harmonics that helped them coordinate movements. At first, the human workers thought it was strange, but after a while, some of them started humming along. The Velnar were surprised by human efficiency. They worked fast, sometimes too fast, making small mistakes but fixing them quickly. Humans did not wait for perfect conditions. They adapted and improvised. The Velnar way was careful and precise. The human way was quick and flexible. Together, the methods balanced each other. Dr. Helen Grant opened the first joint research center. She had spent her whole career studying alien life in theory. Now she was working with actual aliens, learning about their biology. The discoveries came fast. Velnar's cellular regeneration was incredible. They healed from injuries in days that would take humans weeks. A human doctor named Kevin Long worked with Velnar physician Malreese. Together, they developed new treatments. Velnar regeneration techniques could help human burn victims and trauma patients. Human immunological treatments helped Velnar adapt to Earth-based bacteria. Both species were making each other healthier. But the most remarkable changes were happening in the schools. Teacher Susan Moore set up the first classroom with both human and Velnar children. She was nervous the first day. Would the kids be afraid of each other? Would they be able to communicate? She worried for nothing. Children adapted faster than adults. Within a week, human and Velnar kids were playing together during breaks. A human boy named Tim became friends with a Velnar child named Prelis. They helped each other with homework. Tim was good at math. Prelis was good at writing. They both liked drawing pictures of spaceships. Trade began to flourish between Earth, Mars, and Titan. The Velnar were masters of photonic computing and gravity manipulation. Human manufacturing expertise and raw materials complemented Velnar precision. Factory supervisor Greg Allen ran the first joint production facility. Greg watched as human and Velnar workers assembled hybrid technology that neither species could have built alone. Velnar optical processors went into human-designed cases. Human power systems drove Velnar gravity plates. The products were better than anything either species had made separately. Ambassador Kelrus met regularly with President Cross. They talked about politics and planning, but they also became friends. Kelrus shared Velnar art and music with the president. Cross introduced Kelrus to human culture. One day, Cross played a recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the Velnar leader. Kelrus listened with his eyes closed. When the music ended, tears ran down his face. He told Cross that Velnar music was based on harmony and balance. But human music had something else: passion, struggle, triumph. It was beautiful in a way Velnar music was not. Cross smiled and said that was humanity in a nutshell: messy, passionate, and never giving up. While the surface of Titan bloomed with cooperation, Admiral Hayes prepared for war. She knew the Krath would come eventually. They had to be ready. New shipyards went into construction, building vessels that combined human and Velnar technology. Captain Morrison oversaw the building of the first hybrid warship, the Valiant. It was a beautiful ship, sleek where human vessels were blocky, armored where Velnar ships were graceful. It had Velnar energy shields that could bend light and human missile systems that could track targets through hyperspace. Morrison's chief engineer, Tony Chen, was like a kid with a new toy. He spent 16-hour days integrating the systems. Velnar shielding technology was elegant and efficient. Human weapons were powerful and adaptable. Together, they created something neither species had imagined. The Velnar scientists shared their defensive technology freely. Some felt shame about it. Their civilization had been peaceful for so long they had forgotten how to fight. That pacifism had left them vulnerable when the Krath came. Now they were helping humans build weapons, hoping those weapons would never be needed. Nathan Wells was a human weapons designer. He worked with a Velnar named Carix who had been a military historian. Carix knew about old Velnar weapons from thousands of years ago, before his people had chosen peace. Together, they developed new defensive systems that combined ancient Velnar knowledge with modern human innovation. Trade ships began regular runs between all human colonies and Titan. Pilot Amy Foster flew one of the new hybrid freighters. With Velnar drive modifications, she could make the trip from Earth to Titan in half the time it used to take. She loved her new ship. It responded to controls like it was alive. 6 months after the Velnar arrived, Titan held its first harvest festival. The crops came from hybrid greenhouses using Velnar agricultural science and human genetic engineering. The food was amazing. Vegetables that grew twice as fast, fruits that tasted better than anything grown on Earth, grains that could feed more people with less space. The festival filled the streets of the growing city. Human families walked alongside Velnar families. Children of both species played games together. Food stalls offered dishes from two worlds. There was laughter and music. For a day, everyone forgot about the threat lurking somewhere in deep space. But the celebration ended suddenly. A technician named Beth Carter was monitoring the long-range sensors when she saw something. The sensors had been upgraded with Velnar detection technology, able to see farther than human sensors could. And they were seeing something approaching from deep space. Beth ran the signature through every database. Human ships? No Velnar ships? No trading vessels from other species. No, it did not match anything in the records. But the vector was unmistakable. Whatever it was headed toward Saturn. And it was coming fast. Admiral Hayes received the alert in the middle of the festival. She looked at the data and felt cold. The energy signature was massive. The size was enormous. The speed was impossible for anything human-made. She knew what it was even before Ambassador Kelris confirmed it. The Krath had found them. They were 4 days away, and Earth was about to face its first real test against an alien enemy that had crushed civilizations for centuries. The Krath ship appeared at the edge of the solar system like a nightmare made real. Captain Morrison stared at the sensor readings aboard the Defender and felt his stomach drop. The vessel was twice the size of anything humanity had ever built. Weapon ports covered its hull like the scales of some terrible beast. Power readings were off the charts. Admiral Hayes called an emergency war council within the hour. The holographic display in the command center showed the Krath vessel's path. It was heading straight for Saturn, not bothering to hide or slow down. They had 4 days before it arrived. 4 days to decide if humanity would fight or run. Ambassador Kelris stood before the assembled human and Velnar leaders. His voice shook as he explained what the Krath would do. They never gave up their prey. They tracked refugees across the galaxy, making brutal examples of anyone who helped them. Other species had tried to hide Velnar survivors. The Krath had burned their worlds. President Cross faced the hardest decision of his life. Earth could try to evacuate the Velnar, scatter them across human space in hopes of losing the trail. But Kelris knew better. The Krath would find them. They always found them. And wherever the Velnar went, death would follow. The only other option was to stand and fight. Morrison spoke up immediately. Humanity had made a promise. The Defender and her sister ships, courageous and reliant, now had Velnar technology integrated into every system. They were untested in combat, but they had advantages. The Krath would not expect humans to fight. They certainly would not expect humans to fight well. Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins was Morrison's tactical officer. She spent all night running combat simulations. The numbers looked bad. The Krath scout ship, and it was only a scout ship, outgunned the entire human defense fleet. But Sarah found weaknesses. The Krath relied on heavy armor and overwhelming firepower. They fought like a hammer. Humans with Velnar shields might fight like water, flowing around the blows. Engineer Kyle Roberts worked around the clock with Velnar technicians. They pushed the hybrid ships to their limits, testing every system. They discovered something interesting. Human fusion reactors could overcharge Velnar shields far beyond their design specifications. It would strain everything, maybe break things, but it might give them an edge. On Titan's surface, the Velnar population gathered in the central plaza. Kelris addressed them, his voice broadcast to every home and shelter. He told them the truth. The Krath had found them. Battle was coming. But for the first time in Velnar history, they would not face extinction alone. Humans were standing with them. Humans were willing to fight for them. The human colonists on Titan refused to evacuate. Foreman Linda Hayes organized civilian defense teams. If the fleet failed, if the Krath came to the surface, they would fight with whatever they had. Construction equipment could be weapons. Tools could be used to defend. Nobody was running. Teacher Susan Moore helped evacuate the children to deep shelters beneath the surface. Human and Velnar young went together, holding hands, trying to be brave. The older kids protected the younger ones. Teachers of both species told them stories, trying to keep them calm. But everyone knew what was at stake. Dr. Grant made a disturbing discovery while analyzing old Velnar records about the Krath. The Krath were not just conquerors. They were predators. Their entire society was built on domination. They hunted species that showed weakness, that ran instead of fighting. By helping the Velnar, humanity had marked itself as prey. Even if Earth won this battle, the Krath would come back with more ships. Admiral Hayes sent a message to the approaching Krath vessel. It was simple and direct. The Velnar were under human protection. Any hostile action would be considered an act of war against Earth and all her colonies. She did not expect it to work, but she had to try. The Krath response came 12 hours later. It was a single phrase translated into perfect English. You will learn your place. Morrison gathered his crew in the Defender's briefing room. He looked at their faces. Some were scared. Some were excited. Most were just determined. They were spacers and soldiers, yes, but most had expected to spend their careers patrolling asteroids and escorting mining ships. Now they were preparing to fight an enemy that had destroyed civilizations far older than Earth. He told them the truth. The Krath ship was more powerful. The odds were not good. But humanity had advantages. They were fighting for their home. They were fighting for people who had asked for help. And they had something the Krath might not expect: the ability to adapt, to improvise, to do things that made no tactical sense but somehow worked. The 3 human warships took defensive positions around Titan. They formed a triangle, maximizing their combined firepower and overlapping their shield coverage. Velnar technicians made final adjustments, tuning shield harmonics to frequencies that would resist Krath weapons. Human and Velnar crew members worked side by side at every station. On Earth, billions of people watched the live feeds from Saturn. President Cross addressed the planet, explaining why humanity was risking war for aliens they had known less than a year. Some people protested. They called it foolish to fight for refugees, but most understood. If humanity stood aside now, they would lose something essential. They would lose the right to call themselves civilized. The Krath warship, designated by its crew as the Ravager, crossed Neptune's orbit. It did not slow down. It did not try to communicate further. It simply came on, steady and inevitable as death itself. The commander of that ship, a scarred veteran named Thex, had crushed 23 civilizations in his career. He expected the humans to surrender or die. Either way, he would have the Velnar. Admiral Hayes gave the final order. All ships powered up to full combat readiness. Shields went to maximum, weapons locked on target. Human and Velnar crew members said quiet prayers to their different gods. Then they waited. The Krath ship crossed into Saturn's gravity well. It was close enough now to see with telescopes. The hull was dark metal, covered with scars from 100 battles. It looked ancient and evil. It looked unbeatable. But Morrison had faced long odds before. During the Mars Rebellion, he had held a supply depot against raiders with just 12 soldiers. He had learned something important that day. The enemy that looks unbeatable is still just ships and weapons and people. They could bleed. They could be beaten. You just had to be willing to pay the price. The defense fleet moved to intercept. The Defender took point with courageous and reliant flanking. They accelerated toward the Krath ship at full thrust. Behind them, on Titan's surface, 2 million Velnar and 50,000 humans watched on viewscreens and prayed for a miracle. Lieutenant Jenkins noticed her hands were shaking. She forced them to be still. The targeting computer was locked on. Weapons were ready. She had run this simulation 100 times. But simulations did not have that sick feeling in your stomach when you knew people were about to die. The Krath ship launched fighters. 6 small craft, each one larger than a human shuttle, swept forward in attack formation. They moved with practiced precision, a formation meant to overwhelm and destroy. These fighters had killed before. They expected to kill again. Morrison did not give them the chance. The Defender's missile systems, upgraded with Velnar tracking technology, launched a full spread. The missiles moved faster than Krath fighters expected, guided by systems that predicted movements before they happened. 4 fighters exploded in brilliant flashes. The last 2 turned and ran back to their mothership. Aboard the Ravager, Commander Thex watched his fighters die and felt something he had not felt in years. Surprise. These humans should have been easy prey. Instead, they had just destroyed 4 of his best pilots in seconds. He opened a communication channel, studying the bridge of the human ship. The face on Morrison's screen was reptilian, covered in scars, with cold eyes that held no mercy. Thex spoke in his guttural language, which the translator rendered into English. The Velnar were stolen property. Humanity would surrender them immediately or be destroyed. There would be no negotiation. There would be no mercy. Admiral Hayes responded from the Reliant. Her voice was cold as ice in deep space. The Velnar were not property. They were free beings under human protection. The Krath had one chance to leave peacefully. After that, Earth would show them what happened to bullies who picked the wrong target. Commander Thex laughed. It sounded like rocks grinding together. Then he cut the transmission and opened fire. The Krath warship opened fire with weapons that could crack planets. Plasma lances, superheated to millions of degrees, crossed the distance between ships in seconds. The first barrage hit the Defender's shields and the entire ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. Crew members grabbed onto consoles as the deck tilted, but the shields held. The hybrid Velnar human technology dispersed the plasma in ways Krath weapons were not designed to handle. The energy spread across the shield's surface and dissipated into space. Engineer Tony Chen watched his displays and felt a surge of hope. They could survive this. Morrison ordered return fire immediately. Human railguns accelerating projectiles to a fraction of light speed hammered the Ravager's shields. The Krath ship's defenses flickered but held. Meanwhile, Captain Peter Walsh and the Courageous moved his ship to flank the enemy vessel, adding his weapons to the barrage. The battle became a deadly dance. The Krath ship was more powerful, hitting harder with every shot. But the human ships were faster and more maneuverable. They dodged and weaved, shields flaring as plasma lances barely missed. Tony Chen rerouted power constantly, balancing shields and weapons, doing calculations that no computer could match. Human intuition against Krath power. Lieutenant Jenkins watched the Krath firing patterns. After 6 volleys, she saw it. The Krath weapons were devastating but predictable. They followed optimal targeting protocols, firing at where targets would be based on their current trajectory. She called out warnings seconds before each shot, letting Morrison dodge just in time. The Ravager launched its full fighter complement. 20 craft swarmed out of the launch bays, spreading into attack formation. They moved like a school of fish, coordinated and deadly. Morrison had seconds to make a decision that would save or doom them all. He ordered the Defender straight into the fighter swarm. It was insane. Every tactical manual said you never took a capital ship into close combat with fighters. But Morrison was counting on something. Krath fighters used heavy weapons meant for ship-to-ship combat. At close range, they could not fire without hitting each other. The gambit worked brilliantly and terribly. The Defender's point defense systems, guns meant to shoot down missiles, tore into the fighters at close range. Half the Krath fighters exploded in seconds. But the Defender took massive damage in return. Fighter weapons raked the hull. Shields failed on the port side. Hull breaches erupted on multiple decks. Damage control teams rushed to seal the breaches. Humans and Velnar worked side by side, welding plates and closing bulkheads. On Deck 7, a young Velnar engineer named Solus held a pressure door closed while humans welded it shut, even though it meant he was trapped on the wrong side. He died saving 20 humans. They would remember his name. Admiral Hayes watched Morrison's ship take damage and made her decision. She ordered the Reliant and Courageous to concentrate all fire on the Ravager's engines. If they could not destroy it, maybe they could cripple it. The combined barrage of missiles and railgun rounds hammered the enemy ship's rear section. One of the Krath ship's 3 massive engines exploded. Plasma vented into space in a brilliant plume. The Ravager lurched, losing power and speed. But Commander Thex was not finished. He had underestimated these humans once. He would not make that mistake again. The Krath commander activated the Ravager's planet killer weapon. It was a massive cannon that ran the entire length of the ship, designed to bombard worlds into submission. It drew power from every other system, and when it fired, nothing could survive. Thex would destroy Titan and everyone on it. If he could not have the Velnar, no one would. Sensors detected the energy spike. Sarah Jenkins saw the readings and felt her blood turn to ice. The planet killer was charging. They had 90 seconds before it fired. 90 seconds before 2 million Velnar and 50,000 humans on Titan's surface were vaporized. There was no time for clever tactics or careful planning. There was only one option. Morrison ordered the Defender on a collision course. Full thrust, every remaining bit of power to the engines. His crew understood immediately what he was asking. They would ram the Krath ship. They would stop that weapon from firing, even if it meant dying. Tony Chen pushed the damaged engines to their absolute limits. Warning lights covered his console, but he ignored them. Lieutenant Jenkins locked in the course, her hands steady now. If these were her last moments, she would face them doing her job. Morrison opened a channel to Admiral Hayes. He asked her to tell his family on Earth that he loved them. He asked her to tell the Velnar that some things were worth dying for. Hayes tried to order him to break off, but Morrison had already cut the connection. The Defender accelerated toward the Ravager like a missile. On Titan, engineer Kyle Roberts was monitoring the battle from the surface command center. He watched the Defender's suicidal charge and felt helpless. Then he saw something in the data. The hybrid shield systems were behaving strangely under maximum stress. The Velnar technology was creating feedback loops with the overcharged human reactors. Roberts ran calculations faster than he ever had in his life. The shields, when pushed past every safety limit, could create a brief spatial distortion. It was completely theoretical. It had never been tested. It might kill everyone on the Defender instantly, but it might also do something incredible. He screamed into the communication channel, uploading data directly to the Defender. Tony Chen saw the information appear on his screen and understood immediately. It was insane. It violated every principle of SHIELD technology. But insane was better than certain death. Chen rerouted every remaining bit of power to the SHIELD generators. The engines went dark. Life support dropped to minimum. Weapons went offline. Everything went into the shields. He activated the modified harmonics that Roberts had sent and prayed to every god he had ever heard of. The Defender closed to within 500 meters of the Ravager. The planet killer fired. A beam of energy, powerful enough to crack continents, brilliant enough to blind sensors, struck the Defender at point-blank range. For a fraction of a second, the ship should have been vaporized along with everyone aboard. The overcharged shields bent reality. The beam hit the spatial distortion and refracted, twisted by forces that should not exist. The energy reflected back toward its source. The Ravager's own weapon struck its own hull with catastrophic force. The Krath warship tore itself apart. Secondary explosions rippled through deck after deck. The massive vessel broke in half, then into quarters, then into a spreading field of debris. Commander Thex had one moment to understand what had happened before his bridge exploded around him. The Defender tumbled through space, systems dead, shields collapsed, but miraculously intact. Emergency power slowly flickered on. Morrison looked around his bridge. Everyone was alive. They were battered, some injured, but alive. They had survived the impossible. The Reliant and Courageous moved in immediately, launching rescue shuttles. The Defender was a wreck, unable to move under its own power. But it was a salvageable wreck. More importantly, every single crew member had survived the beam that should have killed them. Velnar medical ships arrived from Titan within minutes. Their advanced trauma care saved lives that human medicine alone could not. Crew members with severe radiation burns were treated with Velnar cellular regeneration. Humans with broken bones received Velnar rapid healing. The medical cooperation that had started in research labs now saved lives in combat. Commander Thex floated in the wreckage, dying from massive injuries. A rescue team from the Reliant found him in the debris field. Against all logic, Admiral Hayes ordered them to bring him aboard. Even after everything he had tried to do, they would try to save him. Velnar doctors worked on Thex for 6 hours. They saved his life, though he would never command a ship again. As he lay recovering, surrounded by the humans he had tried to kill, Thex looked at them with something like understanding. His species had conquered through strength. These humans had won through courage and ingenuity. His last words before losing consciousness were recorded. "These humans do not fear death. Warn the Dominion." On Titan, the celebration erupted like a volcanic explosion. Humans and Velnar poured into the streets, embracing and weeping. They had faced the nightmare and survived. The Krath, the terror that haunted Velnar dreams for generations, had been defeated. The morning after the battle, Titan's sky was filled with rescue shuttles and repair ships. The Defender floated in Saturn's orbit, scarred and broken but still whole. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge looking at the damage reports. 30% of the hull needed replacing. Main engines were destroyed. The shield generators had burned themselves out. But his crew was alive, every single one of them. President Cross addressed Earth and all the colonies. The transmission went out across the solar system, reaching every human settlement from Mercury to the outer stations. He spoke about courage and sacrifice, about promises kept, about the price of standing up to evil. Earth had won its first interstellar war, but the cost had been high. The wounded were many. Burn victims filled medical bays on every ship. Broken bones, radiation sickness, trauma, both physical and mental. But Velnar and human doctors worked together, combining their knowledge. Treatments that would have taken weeks now took days. Lives that would have been lost were saved. Ambassador Kelrus stood before the joint assembly on Titan. Representatives from both species filled the chamber. He spoke in his own language first, then in English. He talked about a debt that could never be repaid, about friendship forged in the fire of battle, about two species now bound together by shared sacrifice. The Velnar would not simply live on Titan as permanent refugees, Kelrus declared. They would become true partners in humanity's future. Every technology they possessed, every piece of knowledge accumulated over thousands of years would be shared freely. The Velnar had been saved. Now they would help humanity reach heights neither species could achieve alone. But the victory had consequences that reached far beyond Saturn. Word spread across the galaxy faster than light could travel. Communications between alien civilizations carried the news. Humanity, the newcomer species barely 3 decades into space travel, had defeated a Krath warship. The implications shook diplomatic channels across a dozen star systems. 3 weeks after the battle, new signals began arriving at Earth. They came from the Torvan, a species fleeing corporate enslavement on their home stations. They came from the Mikresh, running from the ecological collapse of their world. Other species followed, sending desperate messages toward the one civilization that had proven it would fight for the defenseless. Admiral Hayes stood in her office, reading report after report of refugee requests. Earth was becoming a beacon for the lost and desperate. Every species that had nowhere else to turn was looking toward humanity. She felt pride and worry in equal measure. They would need more ships, more colonies, more resources. But they had proven something important. They could win. The Earth Council debated for days about the new refugee requests. Some wanted to close the borders, saying Earth had done enough. Others argued that helping the Velnar had brought incredible benefits. The technological exchange alone had advanced human science by decades. Imagine what more species could teach them. Captain Morrison, recovered from his injuries, was promoted to admiral. His first assignment was overseeing the construction of new defensive platforms around all human colonies. The Krath Dominion was still out there, vast and powerful. The loss of one scout ship would not stop them. They would come again, with more ships and greater force. Engineer Kyle Roberts became the director of hybrid technology development. His work on shield systems had saved the Defender and everyone aboard. Now he worked on pushing the boundaries even further, combining human innovation with Velnar science and incorporating knowledge from new alien friends. Dr. Grant opened a new xenobiology research center 10 times the size of the first. With multiple species now in human space, the opportunities for medical advancement were endless. She had Velnar, human, Torvan, and Mikresh doctors working side by side, learning from each other. Teacher Susan Moore's little school grew into a university. Human and Velnar students studied together, and now Torvan and Mikresh Young joined them. The children learned multiple languages, studied different philosophies, and played games from 4 different worlds. They were growing up knowing that the universe was bigger and more diverse than any single species. The Defender was rebuilt over 3 months. But the scars from battle were left deliberately visible on the hull. Morrison insisted on it. Those scars were a reminder of what had been risked and won. The ship emerged from space dock better than before, incorporating lessons learned from combat. Foreman Linda Hayes led the expansion of Titan's cities. The population was growing fast. More Velnar arrived from hidden enclaves across the galaxy. Hearing that there was finally a safe place to call home, human colonists came too, wanting to be part of the great experiment in interspecies cooperation. Ambassador Kelris and President Cross stood together at the dedication of a new monument in Titan's central plaza. It showed 2 figures, one human and one Velnar, standing back to back and looking toward the stars. The inscription was simple, written in both languages. "We stand together." Admiral Hayes received intelligence reports about the Krath Dominion. The loss of the Ravager had caused chaos in their command structure. Some Krath wanted immediate revenge, to send a full battle fleet to crush Earth. But others urged caution. These humans had destroyed a warship with just 3 vessels. What could they do with a full fleet of hybrid ships? The debate within the Krath Dominion bought Earth time. Time to build more ships. Time to welcome more refugee species and learn from them. Time to forge alliances that would make humanity stronger. Hayes used every day, pushing ship construction to maximum capacity. Morrison took the rebuilt Defender on its first patrol mission to the outer system. The crew had changed. Some members had retired, unable to face combat again. New members joined, both human and Velnar. They worked together as if they had always been one crew, one team. On Earth, life continued with a new awareness. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. More importantly, humanity had chosen what kind of species they would be. Not conquerors, not isolationists, but defenders of those who needed defense, guardians of the lost. The Velnar had a word in their ancient language for those who protected others at the cost of their own safety. The translator struggled with it, but the closest human equivalent was guardian. They began using it to describe Morrison and his crew, then all of humanity. The humans who had stood between them and extinction, the guardians who had crafted them a home and defended it with warships. 3 months after the battle, Ambassador Kelrus visited Morrison aboard the Defender. They stood on the observation deck, looking out at Titan below. The moon was beautiful now, its atmosphere clear, its surface dotted with cities and farms. It was home. Kelrus thanked Morrison again, though they both knew words were inadequate. Morrison said that humanity had simply done what was right. Kelrus replied that doing what was right, when it cost everything, was the definition of heroism. The Velnar would remember this. Their children's children would know the story of the species that refused to look away. The universe was vast and often cruel. The Krath Dominion still threatened. Other dangers lurked in the dark between stars. But on one moon orbiting Saturn, 2 species proved that courage could triumph over fear, that compassion could coexist with strength, that the newest voice in the galaxy would not be silenced by ancient tyrannies. Trade ships now ran regular routes between Earth, Mars, Titan, and the new colonies established by refugee species. Pilot Amy Foster commanded the largest freighter in the fleet, a massive hybrid vessel that carried goods and people across the solar system. She loved the routes that took her past Titan, where she could see the lights of the cities growing brighter each year. On Titan's surface, in the school where human and Velnar children learned together, teacher Susan Moore told the story of the battle. She told it simply, without glorifying war but without hiding the courage it took. The children listened, human and Velnar and others, learning that sometimes standing up to bullies was the only choice that mattered. Years would pass. Earth's sphere of influence would grow. More species would join the alliance of those who stood together. Ships would be built that combined the best of many civilizations. But it all started here in this solar system, when humanity chose to open their doors to desperate refugees and then defended that choice with everything they had. The Defender patrolled the outer system, its scarred hull a reminder and a promise. Captain, now Admiral, Morrison stood on the bridge, older but no less determined. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations, human and Velnar together. Before him, the stars stretched endlessly. Somewhere out there, the Krath were still deciding whether to come again. Morrison hoped they would choose peace. But if they chose war, they would find humanity ready. On Titan, Ambassador Kelrus walked through the city at sunset. The streets were filled with life, with laughter, with hope. Children played. Markets bustled. 2 species that should have been strangers were now neighbors, friends, family. He looked up at the sky, at Earth visible as a blue star in the distance. His people had sought shelter from their dying world. Humanity had crafted them a home. And when death came hunting, humans had defended that home with courage that would echo across the galaxy forever. This was just the beginning. The universe was vast, full of wonders and terrors both.